Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we unpack complex ideas to give you a shortcut to being well-informed. Today we're diving into a topic that, well, at first glance might seem purely about aesthetics, makeup. But as we peel back the layers, you'll discover it's profoundly entwined with identity, rebellion, and, yeah, even survival. Our mission today is to explore the powerful, often subversive, and always fascinating history of makeup through a specifically queer lens. We'll look at how adornment has been used to articulate identities that frequently defied or maybe subtly navigated prevailing societal norms. It's a powerful form of cultural signaling, really.
It's truly compelling, isn't it? To consider how makeup, often symbolized today by, the phrase face beat, transcends simple cosmetic enhancement. For millennia, it's been this dynamic tool for self-expression, for social signaling, and for the cultural articulation of identity across just incredibly diverse societies and time periods. And when we talk about queer history in this deep dive, we're examining individuals and communities whose gender expression, maybe sexual orientation or identity, deviated from the dominant societal expectations of their time. We'll be looking back through a modern queer lens, understanding, of course, that these labels didn't exist then in the same way. But they help us make sense of the past, I think, and recognize these patterns of nonconformity. So how did the powders, pigments, and pencils that have graced faces throughout history become such a potent canvas for identity, for protection, and even for power? Let's unpack this.
All right, let's start way back. Ancient Egypt. This period, it just fundamentally challenges our modern Western perceptions of makeup, doesn't it? Here's a truly remarkable aspect. Cosmetics were not exclusive to one gender. At all. Both men and women extensively used makeup, which, right off the bat, tells us something profound about how universal adornment once was.
You see black coal eyeliner, made from galena, that's a dark lead sulfide mineral, meticulously applied, often in these distinct arching lines around the eyes, for everyone. And vivid green malachite, a really striking copper carbonate pigment, was common for eyeshadow, plus red ochre, which we often associate with tomb paintings. But it was also used for lips and cheeks.
And this wasn't just like a niche practice among the pharaohs.
Not at all. It was widespread, from the very top, the pharaohs, right down to the common people. Placing this in the broader context of history, this widespread practice immediately shows us that the gendering of makeup is fundamentally a social construct. It's not some universal constant or an innate characteristic.
Right. It wasn't inherently feminine then.
Not in the slightest. The Egyptians embraced adornment as a collective identity, almost. Beauty rituals were just deeply embedded in daily life and religious practice. It challenges the very foundation of Western beauty norms that came much later. The Egyptians remind us that beauty practices are mutable, they reflect societal values, not, biological imperatives. It sets this powerful precedent for how identity could be expressed beyond binary gender roles, long before we had those terms.
So it implies a culture where power, divinity could be embodied in ways that didn't stick to strict gendered looks.
Exactly. Adornment was a powerful tool for self-expression, for cultural articulation, beyond those binary constraints we impose today.
Okay, so beyond just looking good, what was the deeper significance here? Because the sources seem to reveal this fascinating blend of meanings.
Oh, absolutely. Practical, spiritual, social. It's all woven together. Practically speaking, kohl protected eyes from the intense sun glare. Pretty essential in that desert environment. And amazingly, later scientific analysis confirmed kohl actually had antibacterial properties.
Wow, really? So
Yeah.
It wasn't just superstition.
No, it probably helped prevent eye infections, which would have been a huge benefit. So it's health, survival, woven into aesthetics.
And the spiritual side, that seems huge too.
Immense. Makeup was deeply integrated into their beliefs about life, death, the afterlife. Cosmetic palettes, the tools they used to grind pigments, were considered so important they were buried in gold with the deceased, as grave goods. That underscores their magical, their religious role. These weren't just makeup trays. They evolved from simple rectangles to ornate designs, sometimes fish-shaped, maybe evoking protection from the goddess Hathor.
Like the Narmer palette, isn't that a famous one?
Exactly. King Narmer's palette, from around 3100 BCE, is incredible. It's not just a cosmetic grinding tool. It's this monumental stone slab depicting the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt. The act of grinding pigments on it literally blended the mundane ritual of adornment with this huge historical political event. It ties makeup to the state, to the divine, to cosmic order. It was a sacred act.
And socially, it was a status symbol too, right?
Definitely. The quality, the quantity of makeup you own, the containers, clear indicators of wealth. Wealthier individuals could afford more expensive coal, maybe stored in these elaborate carved boxes, alabaster, ebony, intricate hieroglyphs.
While the lower classes might have had simpler tools.
Right, maybe just a basic stick of coal that was a visible class marker, signaled prosperity, but also maybe your closeness to the divine, to power.
You think about Queen Nefertiti's bust, that iconic image.
Ah, yes, crafted around 1345 BCE. It's such a powerful testament. Her distinctive eyeliner, those bold, extended kohl lines, it's often noted for lending her this regal, somewhat androgynous energy. That aesthetic choice suggests makeup contributed to an appearance that really transcended strict gender boundaries. It symbolized political power, spiritual devotion maybe, rather than just conforming to a simple binary.
So a kind of fluid aesthetic expression was possible, even embraced at the highest levels.
It seems so. It suggests a culture where ideal beauty, ideal power, could encompass this blend of qualities we might now label masculine and feminine, all in one powerful figure. It really makes you ask, what does it tell us about societies that embrace that kind of fluidity in aesthetics? It suggests power and divinity weren't always rigidly gendered in appearance.
Okay, let's shift gears. Moving from Egypt to classical Greece. Quite a contrast, isn't it?
A stark contrast, yeah. In Greece, the natural look was generally favored, especially for respectable women. Cosmetics were often looked down upon on ordinary women. They became primarily associated with courtesans, the hetairai.
Suggesting something illicit, maybe. Theatrical, not quite proper.
Exactly. Respectable citizen women were expected to be modest. Overt adornment was suspicious, maybe a sign of vanity or deception.
But men did use makeup sometimes.
They did, yes. Things like darkening eyebrows, maybe using rouge, especially for theatrical performances or certain rituals. But here's the tension. For everyday freeborn men, public display of makeup could be seen as a sign of effeminacy. And what's really insightful is how this perceived effeminacy was sometimes attributed by Greeks to non-Greeks, like Persians. And later, the Romans would sometimes say the same about the Greeks.
Ah, so it becomes a cultural judgment, tied to identity, morality, not just appearance.
Precisely. It wasn't just about how you looked. It was about appearing other, less masculine, which carried significant social weight. It implied a weakness of character, a deviation from the ideal citizen.
Okay, so despite this social stigma around visible makeup and sort of gender-bending appearances, what were Greek thinkers actually discussing? Because there seems to be some openness there, too.
That's the fascinating part. While public display was frowned upon, philosophically, there was some exploration of diverse identities. Plato's Symposium, for instance, that text from the 4th century BCE, includes Aristophanes' myth of the three original genders.
The man-man, woman-woman, and woman-man beings.
Right. It hints at these conceptualizations beyond a simple binary, even if it's framed as a myth. It shows an awareness of identities defying conventional pairings. And then you have Sappho, the poet from Lesbos, writing much earlier, around the 7th century BCE. Her lyrics vividly document female-female desire, intimate relationships.
So those bonds existed, were recognized, even if not always celebrated openly.
Exactly. And then there's pederasty.
Right, the relationship between an adult man, the Erastes, and a teenage boy, the Eromenos.
Yes, a socially acknowledged practice, functioning as mentorship, education, sometimes military training. Controversial now, obviously, but part of their social structure. But here's the crucial link to makeup and gender. The roles within pederasty were highly, highly gendered. The active, penetrative role was strongly linked to masculinity, adulthood, higher status. The passive role, however, was linked to femininity, youth, lower status.
Ah, okay, so that structure directly shapes how cosmetics are viewed.
Absolutely. If makeup implied a passive or feminized appearance for a freeborn adult man, it would be severely stigmatized. It shows this clear tension between maybe abstract philosophical ideas and the very rigid lived realities of gender expression. That Greek emphasis on active-passive roles profoundly influenced how male-male relationships were seen, how masculinity was defined. Makeup use got tangled up in perceived social and sexual roles, and ultimately, a man's honor and civic standing.
Okay, so let's move to Imperial Rome. Their story with makeup also evolved, didn't it? A similar path in some ways.
Similar, but with its own distinct twists. Initially, in early Imperial Rome, some men did use makeup. It could be a sign of wealth, vitality, applying red pigment to cheeks, maybe from ochre or minium, powder to lighten the skin, suggesting a noble, untainted complexion, someone who didn't toil in the sun.
A mark of status, like in Egypt, but maybe less universal?
Less universal, perhaps, and more tied to the elite who could afford it, and the slaves needed for those elaborate toilets. But this shifted dramatically as the empire went on. Later, excessive makeup, hair dyeing on men, became a target of severe criticism. It was viewed as feminine ways, a degradation of Roman manliness, their concept of virtus.
And virtus was more than just physical strength, right?
Oh, yeah. It encompassed courage, civic duty, moral excellence, a kind of stoic demeanor, qualities essential for a true Roman citizen. So this shift points to growing anxieties about masculinity, appearance, maybe luxury, and moral decay. And it begs the question, what causes such a significant societal shift in perception?
Often tied to broader cultural anxieties. Power, morality, what it means to be a true Roman in a changing empire.
I think so. Especially as wealth and perceived moral decline became linked with luxury and non-Roman influences.
And it's in this later period we encounter Emperor Elagabalus. He really stands out, doesn't he?
He absolutely does. Reigned just a few years, 218 to 222 CE, but left a huge mark in historical accounts, albeit hostile ones. Writers like Cassius Dio, Herodian, they describe him painting his face more elaborately than that of any modest woman. Using white lead for that extreme pallor, alkanet a plant dye for red on his cheeks and lips. Plucking his beard for a woman-like look.
And the reports go beyond makeup, right? Preferring lady over lord, seeking surgery.
Exactly. Reportedly preferring female forms of address, even supposedly seeking physicians to contrive a woman's vagina in his body, offering huge sums. Now, whether these accounts are fully accurate or exaggerated propaganda.
Because he was deeply unpopular, right? They wanted to discredit him.
Precisely. But even as propaganda, they powerfully illustrate a perceived gender fluidity and the deliberate use of makeup to express it. And placing this back in context, Roman society, like the Greeks, emphasized that active, dominant male role for freeborn citizens, assuming a passive role, sexually or socially, was a threat to a citizen's liberty and integrity, often associated with slaves, foreigners, or those of lower status.
And as Christianity grew, that intensified.
Definitely. Laws increasingly condemned same-sex acts, particularly targeting passive partners with severe punishments, sometimes death. This legal framework just reinforced the societal stigma against effeminacy and any kind of gender nonconformity.
So makeup for Roman men went from potentially signaling power to signaling effeminacy, moral decay, especially as Christian influence grew.
A clear transition, and the sensationalized accounts of Elagabalus show how cosmetic choices could be weaponized, used to demonize figures defying norms, transforming personal aesthetics into this public symbol of perceived deviance. A political tool, really.
Okay, let's journey into medieval Europe, a period heavily shaped by the church. Pale skin was still valued for women.
Yes, that ideal persisted, signifying high status, freedom from outdoor labor, a visible marker of nobility. You didn't work the fields. But the church's influence led to this increasing condemnation of cosmetics generally. They were seen as sinful, linked explicitly to vanity, deception, trying to improve God's creation, and often harlotry.
So a real moral crackdown on adornment.
Very much so. Theologians argued it deceived God, deceived men. Maybe reluctant acceptance if it was just for one's husband, but anything more. Severely condemned. It was about controlling female appearance and behavior.
But there's a paradox here, isn't there, in religious art?
A striking paradox.
Yeah.
Despite condemning gender nonconformity in daily life, medieval art sometimes depicted Jesus in, well, womanly ways. Think of the Christ as mother imagery. Jesus shone with a breast, offering spiritual nourishment. It suggests this abstract, symbolic space where gender fluidity was acceptable, maybe even powerful, within religious iconography.
But that was separate from how actual people were expected to behave.
Absolutely. A stark contrast with the suppression of overt gender nonconformity in human expression, a real tension between theological metaphor and lived reality.
And what about queer relationships in this rigid time? Did they exist?
Evidence suggests they did, despite the illegality and condemnation, often within monastic orders, intriguingly. We find clues in love letters and poems between monks, between nuns, passionate correspondence, figures like Alcuin and Arno, Anselm and Gilbert. Their letters suggest deep emotional, possibly physical bonds. There are records of passionate letters between Bavarian nuns too, glimpses into hidden lives.
Even someone powerful like Hildegard of Bingen.
Yes, the 12th century abbess, mystic, composer. She had this documented close and passionate relationship with her secretary Richardus. Yet Hildegard also wrote theological condemnations of female-female fornication, which some scholars now read as, the lady doth protest too much.
Suggesting maybe internal conflict, or just pragmatic alignment with the church.
Could be either, or both. What's clear is the carefully constructed to be covert nature of these stories. Passionate letters often dismissed later as just special friendships. It highlights a survival strategy. And makeup. If used subtly within acceptable norms for women, perhaps, it could have been part of this covert expression, a hidden layer, allowing some personal identity without direct condemnation, an invisible power, maybe.
Okay, moving into the Renaissance and the 17th century, pale skin is still the ideal.
Still very strong, yes, for both men and women in the upper classes, achieved with highly toxic lead-based paints like Venetian ceruse.
Oh, that sounds dangerous.
Extremely dangerous. Often caused skin damage, hair loss, even death. But it symbolized wealth, nobility, leisure. And men of the royal courts definitely engaged in elaborate adornment, too. Wigs became huge, literally. False eyebrows, sometimes made of mouse fur. Lip color wasn't uncommon.
Think of the courts of Louis XIV in France or Charles I in England.
Exactly. Opulence was key. Adornment was a sign of status, power, spectacle for everyone at that level.
But this period also marks a shift in gendering makeup.
A crucial transition, yes. While both genders used cosmetics significantly in the 15th century, a discernible shift began. By the 17th century, you see women increasingly becoming the primary consumers. The association of makeup with the feminine starts to really solidify.
And the religious condemnation continues?
It grows, if anything. Powerful clergymen declare makeup unacceptable to both men and women. But the impact on men becomes quite specific. Here's where it gets really interesting. The association of makeup with effeminacy for men grows particularly strong.
So the church's stance reinforces this gendering.
Profoundly. By condemning makeup as vanity and deception, and simultaneously enforcing rigid gender roles, male use of cosmetics gets increasingly stigmatized. It lays the groundwork for what historians call the Great Masculine Renunciation later on. It wasn't just morality, it was about defining and enforcing gender, pushing men towards a more austere, natural look, symbolizing rationality, seriousness, moral uprightness.
In contrast to perceived female vanity.
Exactly, setting the stage for centuries of association between makeup and femininity.
Okay, fast forward to 18th century England. Let's talk about the macaronis.
Ah, the macaronis. Yes. These were aristocratic young men, often just back from their grand tour of Europe, especially Italy. And they embraced this incredibly extravagant, highly artificial aesthetic, deliberately pushing boundaries.
How extreme are we talking?
Very extreme. Extensive makeup, white lead powder for that ghostly pale look, vibrant rouge on cheeks and lips, decorative beauty patches, those little silk or velvet shapes.
Stars, hearts near the eye, near the mouth.
Exactly. And they can signal things, flirtation, political allegiance sometimes. Then add enormous powdered wigs, towering structures, elaborate, brightly colored silk suits, ruffles, lace. The term macaroni itself mocked their adoption of excessive foreign, particularly Italian, macaroni being staple food, styles. They were known for enormous wigs and their excessive use of makeup. A real spectacle.
So what did society think? They must have caused a stir.
A huge stir. Caricatures in popular prints, satirical writings. They were mercilessly lampooned, described as a kind of animal, neither male nor female, a thing of the neuter gender. Their style seen as part male, part female. Some historians even call them a form of 18th century drag artist. It shows how profoundly their look challenged gender norms,
Prompting ridicule, moral outrage.
despite their aristocratic privilege. And that raises the question, how did this visible gender nonconformity actually function in what was still a pretty suppressive society? Their exaggerated look served as a form of queer coding.
A visual language. In a time when being openly gay was illegal, dangerous.
Exactly. Homosexuality was taboo, punishable by death. So makeup, fashion became this way to signal nonconformity, maybe identify with the developing queer subculture, find others in the know. While their wealth offered some protection, they could perhaps experiment with the queer identity in public without incurring the wrath of the heterosexuals law. As one historian put it, the sheer volume of public mockery shows significant disapproval.
It foreshadows later more intense suppression.
I think so. It shows that even when not strictly illegal for them, visible gender nonconformity via aesthetics carried social risks. It was daring, a subtle yet visible resistance, a whisper of identity.
Then comes the 19th century, the Victorian era, the Great Masculine Renunciation.
A dramatic, almost complete shift, yes. Makeup becomes largely deemed vulgar, an abomination. Influential figures like Queen Victoria, the Church of England, they strongly disapprove. It becomes almost exclusively associated with women, femininity, and often explicitly linked to low morals, prostitution. Men largely abandoned visible cosmetics, embraced this ideal of starkness, seriousness in dress, natural appearance, tailored suits, reflecting industrial middle-class values, hard work, moral rectitude.
Creating a very restrictive environment.
Highly restrictive. Any deviation was suspect. Yet, despite the pervasive stigma, despite laws against gross indecency between men, queer men, particularly maybe in the interwar period bleeding out of the Victorian era, actively adopted women's use of makeup to express this femininity.
So it wasn't passive acceptance, but a deliberate choice, expressing something counter to the norm.
A deliberate choice, exactly, to express a perceived feminine nature or identity that flew in the face of those rigid masculine norms. That renunciation, linking makeup to low morals, made queer men's adoption of it an act of resistance, a crucial subcultural signifier, despite the huge risks.
And it was dangerous, right? Not just socially frowned upon.
Profoundly dangerous. The association became so strong, makeup equals femininity equals illicit sexuality, that merely possessing cosmetics could be incriminating in court. There's the infamous case of Thomas B. in 1924, prosecuted for importuning, essentially soliciting men, and his possession of a mirror, powder, and a powder puff was used as significant evidence against him.
Wow. Everyday items turned into proof of criminality.
The prosecutor explicitly linked these items to his supposed unmanly behavior, therefore his guilt. It's terrifying. It really shows how the state actively co-opted aesthetic choices to police and criminalize queer identities. Makeup transformed from personal expression into a legal battleground. Reflecting deep societal anxieties, became a homosexual sign of recognition, as scholars note, but also a dangerous act, forcing choices between self-expression and safety. Yet many still chose to, well, paint their truth.
Let's jump to the Roaring '20s, the Jazz Age. A different vibe entirely.
Oh yeah, a new spirit of sexual freedom, rebellion. A vivid contrast to the Victorian constraints. The flapper emerges as this iconic symbol. Short skirts, bobbed hair, defiant attitude. And flapper makeup was notably heavy compared to before. Dark, kohl-rimmed eyes, thin, dramatic eyebrows, bold red bee-stung lips, even rouge on powdered knees.
A whole aesthetic designed to shock, break from tradition.
Absolutely. Integral to their challenge to traditional femininity, a visible marker of change. And concurrently, the mannish lesbian, or butch figure, gained more visibility, especially in cities' bohemian circles. These women flouted conventions by wearing makeup, smoking, cutting their hair short, or dressing in masculine clothes.
So makeup becomes part of gender nonconforming expression within lesbian subcultures too, sometimes alongside masculine clothes.
Yes, defiantly subverting gender conventions. It marks this significant shift from the covert coding of the past to more visible, though still risky, aesthetic subversion. Identity, protection within their communities.
And drag balls become more popular in this era.
They really take off. They'd started mid-19th century, but gained huge popularity in the 20s, especially in places like New York, Harlem. Vibrant competitions, elaborate makeup, costumes, performance, attracting thousands of diverse crowds, gay, lesbian, bi, trans, straight folks too, a real melting pot.
What were the early drag makeup styles like?
Smoky eyes, heart-shaped lips, often influenced by famous female impersonators of the time, like Julian Eltinge. Blending theatricality with feminine allure, these balls, with their focus on makeup, transformation, performance, they provided vital spaces for queer identities. More than just entertainment, community gatherings, showcases of artistry, incubators of style. They started influencing mainstream culture, paving the way for broader visibility. Makeup as self-creation, liberation.
Which brings us to Weimar Republic Berlin, 1918 to 1933, the queer capital of the world.
Truly. After WWI, the fall of the monarchy, a new liberal constitution, it created this unprecedented window of freedom. The city had, estimates say, over 65 gay clubs and bars, many with cabarets, drag performances, offering freedom, community, joy, a place to live openly.
Imagine that after centuries of suppression.
It must have been incredible. And central to this was Magnus Hirschfeld, a gay Jewish physician. Founded the Institute for Sexual Science way back in 1897, but it really flourished in Weimar. Groundbreaking work, advocating for LGBTQ+ rights, providing counseling, medical services, including pioneering gender confirmation procedures for trans individuals, researching sexual diversity.
Way ahead of his time, championing the idea of gender and sexuality as spectrums.
Absolutely. Publishing research, advocating decriminalization. A true pioneer.
And the cabaret culture, that was huge too.
Flourished. Satirical, provocative, boundary-pushing, often nudity, sharp social commentary. A crucial platform for the gay community. The El Dorado Club became iconic. Lavish, welcoming queer and straight patrons, famous for its drag shows. Makeup styles there were exaggerated, flapper-esque. Gold-winged eyeliner, dark lipstick, heavy blush, reflecting that expressive, experimental vibe. Cross-dressing racy shows, Berlin as Babylon to some, a beacon to others.
So makeup becomes openly celebrated, part of queer identity, community.
Visible and celebrated. Moving beyond coding to open performance, artistic expression. A significant moment where aesthetics were overtly embraced as part of queer liberation, a joyful affirmation of identity, building community, pushing back against the past.
But the story takes that sharp, tragic turn.
Brutally short-lived. The rise of the Nazi Party from 1933. Horrific suppression. Paragraph 175, the law criminalizing male homosexuality, was heavily enforced, expanded. Widespread arrests. Clubs like El Dorado, seized. Turned into Nazi SA headquarters. A chilling symbol. Hirschfeld's Institute for Sexual Science. Rated May 6, 1933. Its priceless library, archives, burned in public book burnings.
Erasing history, erasing identities.
Exactly. And queer individuals were systematically targeted. Imprisoned, tortured, murdered in concentration camps, marked often with pink triangles. It just underscores how rapidly political shifts can criminalize, erase visible queer identities and their cultural markers. The fragility of social progress. The political weaponization of aesthetics. What was celebrated became a death sentence. A truly horrifying regression.
Let's move into the mid-20th century. Post-WWII through the 1960s, a period of repression again in many places, right? Particularly the U.S.
Significant repression, yes. Homosexuality was widely pathologized, sexual inversion, mental illness, listed in the DSM. This led to horrific coercive conversion therapies, electric shocks, nausea drugs, even lobotomies, trying to cure people. Laws against same-sex acts were common. Social stigma was immense. Fear, secrecy, the reality for countless individuals.
Leading many to hide, leading hidden lives.
Absolutely. Concealing identities to avoid persecution, losing jobs, families, facing violence, and many turned to alcohol, other drugs, as a coping mechanism. For the stress, the loneliness, the oppression. A very dark time. Self-medication is a grim refuge.
So how did community form in that climate? Gay and lesbian bars seem crucial.
Crucial, yes, but also clandestine. Often operating in secret, subject to frequent, often violent police raids. They fostered this tight-knit community spirit, offered solace, connection. But yes, they also inadvertently cultivated this culture of drinking, later drug use, as coping, as social lubrication, as part of seeking freedom.
And then Stonewall happens in 1969, a turning point.
A major turning point. The Stonewall riots really ignited the modern LGBTQ+ rights movement. And by the late 60s, early 70s, substance use tied to this bar club culture became, for some parts of the community, an established societal norm. It got linked to the flourishing sexual liberation movement, the idea of free and open expression of the queer body as a political act.
So while mainstream society suppressed, makeup found outlets. In drag clubs.
Yes, in those spaces.
Yeah.
As self-expression, community building, a sense of freedom, identity, even in clandestine settings. It highlights that complex legacy spaces of refuge also becoming sites of vulnerability, even as they forged powerful bonds.
And drag makeup kept evolving through this.
Definitely. The 50s saw those dramatic styles, high-arched brows, sharp winged liner, falsies, shimmery lips, designed for visibility in dim clubs, intensified in the 60s. Thick mascara, cop-and-bottom lashes, thin arched brows for drama, vibrant bubblegum pink lips, growing boldness.
And house culture emerges around this time, too.
A powerful emergence, yes. Growing out of the ballroom scene, especially among Black and Latino LGBTQ+ folks. These self-formed families, houses led by mothers or fathers, providing crucial emotional, financial, physical support for those rejected by biological families. Incredible resilience. The ballroom scene itself, elaborate categories, fierce competition, stunning drag became the space of fierce self-expression, validation, using makeup, costume to redefine beauty, success on their own terms.
Then the early 80s hits. The AIDS epidemic. Devastating.
Devastating doesn't even begin to cover it. Initially called GRIA, gay-related autoimmune disease.
Yeah.
And naming itself created this powerful, damaging link between homosexuality and AIDS. Led to widespread stigmatization of gay men, intense fear, discrimination, loss, compounding existing vulnerabilities, panic, prejudice.
And this trauma impacted substance use, too.
Often increased it, yes, as a coping mechanism for overwhelming grief, fear, uncertainty. HIV-positive individuals, studies showed, had a greater likelihood of illicit substance use, attributed partly to coping with HIV worries, alienation, homophobia, isolation. It's that complex interplay again. Trauma, sexual liberation, substance use, historical trauma intertwining with health risks.
And the party and play, or P&P subculture, emerges.
Yes, rises in this era, where some gay men use recreational drugs, meth, MDMA, GHB, cocaine, often with sexual activity, seeking enhanced experiences, energy-lowered inhibitions. Escape, maybe. Methamphetamine became a particular concern, correlated with increased HIV risk due to effects on desire, decision-making. And poppers, alkyl nitrites, had already seen a craze in the 70s, gay scene, bars, discos, bathhouses. valued for muscle relaxation, facilitating sex, plus euphoria, lowered inhibitions. Part of that liberation landscape, but with risks.
And the media's role, often harmful.
Complex and often very harmful. Initially framing HIVs as a gay disease, reinforcing stigma, hindering effective public health responses. Later, sensationalized coverage of chemsex, PNP, contributed to moral panics, perpetuated harmful stereotypes, obscuring the deeper issues of trauma, neglect. It really makes you ask how media narratives shape public perception, especially during a crisis, right? And what responsibility they have.
But amidst all this darkness, the LGBTQ plus community fought back, harm reduction.
Incredible resilience and self-determination. Refused to be passive victims. Activists emerged as this powerful force, pioneering strategies like underground needle exchanges, fiercely advocating for access to experimental AIDS drugs, pushing governments, pharma, promoting comprehensive safe sex education through grassroots groups like ACT-UP Silence, Death. They took action, collective agency, care.
Laying the groundwork for modern harm reduction.
Absolutely. These community-driven efforts are widely credited with saving millions of lives. Proactive health advocacy born from crisis. Adversity forged these powerful movements. It cemented the queer community's role as pioneers in public health activism. Marginalized voices driving huge societal shifts. Collective protection.
Which brings us more towards the present. The evolution of drag makeup itself is quite a story, from theatrical necessity
to this sophisticated art form. Early 20th century, exaggerated for stage lights, smoky eyes, heart lips. Then the 50s, 70s, drama highbrows, winged liner. Now, it's incredibly intricate.
And modern drag makeup has really pushed boundaries, influencing mainstream beauty.
Hugely. Developing popularizing techniques now fundamental everywhere. Contouring, sculpting the face with light and shadow, that came from drag. Baking, that heavy translucent powder application for a flawless, almost porcelain finish. Drag perfected that for long-lasting stage wear. Now it's all over YouTube tutorials, a clear trickle-up effect.
And contemporary drag artistry itself, what defines it?
Bold colors, dramatic eyes, impossibly sculpted cheekbones, creating these larger-than-life characters. It's transformation, embodying a persona, often using glitter, rhinestones, elaborate wigs, fantastical looks, the art of illusion, self-definition.
So the cultural significance within the queer community is deep.
Multifaceted, yeah. A powerful medium for self-expression, identity validation, that profound experience of gender euphoria for trans and non-binary folks, seeing yourself reflected back authentically.
It's more than looking the part, it's feeling it.
Exactly. The joy of recognition. And beyond personal expression, it functions as resistance. Resistance against conditioning that often says beauty is female only, challenging traditional standards, embracing authenticity, and it's a social unifier, signaling shared understanding, identifying community, fostering belonging in what can be an isolating world, a silent language of solidarity.
So this whole evolution from theatrical tool to mainstream influencer.
It demonstrates makeup's power as identity, performance, social change. Drag makeup transformed from necessity to art form, directly challenging binary norms, providing this visible platform for queer identity, profoundly influencing mainstream beauty, that reciprocal relationship subculture, driving broader cultural shifts, promoting a more inclusive, fluid vision of beauty, transcending traditional boundaries, a testament to self-creation against societal pressure.
So wrapping this all up, what does this deep dive tell us today? It reveals this dynamic, often subversive story way beyond just conventional beauty. From ancient Egypt's universal adornment, spiritual, practical status, to the hidden expressions in Greece and Rome, makeup constantly reflects and shapes attitudes towards identity.
Absolutely. And the journey shows how dramatically cultural values redefine aesthetics. That shift from universal use to intense gendering by medieval religious condemnation and the Victorian great masculine renunciation. What was once for everyone became for so long coded as feminine, often negatively for men. A powerful reminder of how social constructs change.
Yet despite suppression, even criminalization, queer individuals always found ways, using makeup for self-expression, resistance, community. Macaronis performing ambiguity, the defiant looks of jazz-age flappers and mannish lesbians, carving out new spaces. And Weimar Berlin, that vibrant, pivotal moment of openness, so tragically erased, underscoring that fragility of progress, the weaponization of aesthetics.
And ultimately, it culminates in modern drag culture.
Yeah.
Makeup is sophisticated art, celebrating individuality, transforming personas, challenging norms, techniques refined there, permeating the mainstream, showing that powerful reciprocal relationship. marginalized expressions driving broader shifts to inclusivity. This history confirms makeup isn't superficial. It's this profound, enduring medium where queer identities have been expressed, resisted, celebrated across millennia, a testament to defining oneself, finding community against all odds.
If this episode made you reflect or maybe reminded you of your first lipstick crush hit, like, subscribe, and send it to a friend who knows how to paint their truth.
You're listening to The Deep Dive, because sometimes history is lighter in whispers.